The waiter approached her table, carrying the ring with a carefulness that reminded me of an executioner holding his sword. I watched her from across the room, feeling a surprising calm settle over me. The restaurant buzzed with laughter and the clinking of wine glasses, but for me, the moment seemed suspended in time when I caught that stunned look on her face. She spotted me out of the corner of her eye first, then her gaze locked onto the ring he was handing over. Her eyes went wide, and right then, I knew she understood. That wedding ring was more than just a piece of jewelry, it was a wordless declaration that I knew everything. It was the warning sign that our marriage was finished. For months, I had been an audience to a play where everyone knew the lines except me, constant outings, texts that never seemed quite work-related, soft laughter in the dead of night, each laugh like a quiet confession. I saw it all, every small detail, but I kept up the act of ignorance, waiting. Waiting for her to say something, to admit it, to offer any kind of explanation that, even if false, might spare me from having to piece it all together myself. But she never did, and bit by bit, I found myself pulled into a game I had no interest in playing but couldn't walk away from. I was going to show her exactly what it felt like to be deceived, right there in front of everyone, with the man she thought was her ticket to happiness. This wasn't just about wounded pride or love gone wrong, it was about trust thrown away like yesterday's trash. I remember the first time we met, how she laughed at my corny jokes, held my hand like we were meant to be. Those memories used to make me feel warm inside, but now they just burned, like smoldering embers setting everything ablaze. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered our prenuptial agreement, that little document we'd signed with such optimism all those years ago, now coming into focus as a perfect solution. She was going to lose it all, everything she'd lied for, cheated for, pretended for, and I knew she hadn't even considered this possibility when she started playing this dirty game. The waiter finally reached the table. Her lover sat back, laughing at something he'd just said, blissfully unaware of what was about to happen. She looked up, and that's when she noticed me, watching her every move with a look she'd never seen before. Her smile faded like a candle blown out, replaced by an expression of utter horror. She realized that the weight of that ring wasn't just about the pain of a breakup, it symbolized everything that was coming next, the harsh reality and consequences she feared most. Her lover looked back and forth between us, bewildered, trying to make sense of the moment but unable to piece together what I already knew. I almost laughed at the irony but held back, staying calm and composed. There was nothing left to say, no explanations to offer. The ring was my final word, the last punctuation in a story she had chosen to end. As I walked out of the restaurant, I felt eyes follow me, sensing the weight of their judgment, but it didn't matter. All I wanted was for her to grasp what she had just lost. She had thrown away our shared past, our story, for a flimsy, empty fantasy, and now she was left with nothing but the guilt she'd earned. The next step, one she couldn't even begin to imagine, was already in motion, a final twist that would strip her of the comfort she assumed was hers by right. She had no idea that every dollar, every asset was protected. I wasn't going to let her walk away with a thing, just like she left me with nothing when she chose to betray me. As I walked away, I pictured the shock she'd feel when she stumbled across that clause later that night. What she hadn't realized yet, but soon would, was that her betrayal wouldn't just shatter what we had, it would also strip away everything she thought was secure. Welcome to the channel, where no excuses for betrayal are given a pass. Every story shared here is fictional, yet grounded in one undeniable truth: betrayal is a poison that tears lives apart, wrecks relationships, and leaves scars that never quite fade. Prepare yourself for an intense tale where every choice has a consequence. Put on your headphones and get ready to dive into a web of secrets and stunning revelations. Let's get into it. Ethan Turner always believed he'd found his one true love in Sarah. They crossed paths at a college party during their senior year, and it felt like destiny had stepped in to bring them together. Sarah's laughter was easy, and there was a lightness about her that drew him in. She was an artist, gifted with a paintbrush, and she brought passion to every little thing, from blending colors to the way she enunciated each word. Ethan, by contrast, was a practical and focused businessman, calm and introspective, which balanced their relationship beautifully. For years, their marriage seemed like the joining of two people who were simply meant to be together. They shared spontaneous road trips and late-night talks that only brought them closer. Ethan felt certain that Sarah was the perfect partner for his life. He had built a strong career and took pride in each accomplishment, but with Sarah, he shared his deepest dreams. Together, they bought a house and put care into every part of it, each detail, from the wall colors to the garden filled with carefully chosen flowers, was a piece of both of them. But with time, things began to shift. Sarah, who had always been a bit restless, started expanding her social circle. Driven by her passion to grow as an artist and a desire for recognition, she started to seek a more active role in the art world. Naturally, Ethan felt a twinge of discomfort as the nights out increased and she devoted more of herself to gallery shows and cultural events. He tried to push down his unease, chalking it up to a phase of self-discovery she was entitled to. As the years went on, Ethan threw himself into his work, convincing himself it was his way of securing their future. He firmly believed in the balance they'd established, and whenever he could, he did his best to make their time together special with dinners, weekend getaways, or thoughtful surprises. Sarah always seemed appreciative, but there was a distance in her eyes sometimes, as though her thoughts were somewhere else. Ethan noticed her mind seemed to wander but chose to believe it was simply exhaustion or a need for her own space. Ethan's trust in Sarah was solid, but like anyone, he wasn't immune to those small doubts that creep up in day-to-day life. On rare occasions, when Sarah seemed particularly closed off, he'd feel a pang of uncertainty, but he quickly brushed it aside. He reminded himself of the trust and love they'd built together, and that was usually enough to quiet his fears. Yet, the home they'd built with so many memories and shared dreams was beginning to feel different, something subtle but unmistakably there. The long, deep conversations started giving way to short exchanges, and there was more silence between them. Ethan found himself wondering when things had changed, but he could never pinpoint the exact moment. The shift, much like the wear, had crept in gradually, like a small turn off a road that had once seemed perfectly straight. One night, Sarah came home later than usual from a gallery event where she'd been showcasing her work. Ethan waited for her in the living room, a glass of wine in hand, looking visibly tired but trying to maintain a welcoming demeanor. When Sarah walked through the door, she dropped her bag onto the floor and sighed, as if carrying some heavy, unseen burden. Ethan tried to ease into a conversation, asking about the exhibition, wondering how her night went, and who she'd met. Her replies were brief and disjointed, but Ethan pressed on. "Everything okay?" he asked, trying to bridge the gap that had somehow grown between them. There was a pause before she responded, a hesitation he wasn't used to seeing in her. "Yes, it was a good night," she said, though she avoided meeting his eyes. Ethan sensed something was off, but he decided not to push. He knew her well enough to understand that if he pressed too hard, she'd only retreat further. Still, the uneasy feeling gnawed at him. In that quiet moment, he sensed a barrier between them, a wall that he had no idea how to tear down. Despite the growing doubts in his mind, Ethan tried to keep things peaceful, clinging to memories of the closeness they once shared. Each memory felt like an attempt to repair what seemed to be unraveling between them. He still loved her deeply, but he feared that his love was like sand slipping through his fingers, falling apart while he stood by, helpless to stop it. Meanwhile, Sarah was drawn ever deeper into her own world, captivated by her desire to broaden her artistic reach and excited by the new people she met in art circles. She found herself drawn to the freedom those new possibilities seemed to offer. Sarah still loved Ethan, but she felt a shift within herself, a yearning for something she couldn't quite name. The security he provided no longer felt enough. Over the months, her small gestures and glances revealed this growing distance. Ethan watched her with the patience of someone hoping she would rediscover herself, that this divide between them was only a temporary phase. He wanted her to return to being the woman he'd fallen in love with, the one with whom he had shared the best moments of his life. Whenever their eyes met, he saw the same woman he loved, but now that image was clouded by a sense of uncertainty. The tension between them was subtle, but it lingered like a shadow creeping over their relationship. Alone, Ethan often found himself reflecting on the choices they'd made, the paths they'd taken, and wondering if things could have turned out differently. He felt a strange nostalgia for the future they'd envisioned together, as though it was slipping away from him. But even with these doubts, he clung to hope, believing that with time and patience, they could get through anything. He understood Sarah's complexity, knowing she sometimes needed to lose herself to truly find her way. What he feared, though, was that this time she might not find her way back to him. Ethan tried to reassure himself that their relationship was simply weathering a rough patch, a phase that would eventually strengthen their bond. He knew Sarah was full of life and dreams, and her artistic pursuits had always been an integral part of who she was. But slowly, he began to sense that things were changing. Her outings became more frequent, her answers more evasive, and even their casual interactions felt rehearsed, as if she were physically present but her spirit was somewhere else entirely. Every time he tried to reach out to her, he was met with answers that were vague or distracted, making him feel as if, instead of standing beside her, he was always several steps behind, struggling to close the distance. One night, Sarah arrived even later than usual, carrying a faint scent of a perfume that wasn't hers. She walked into the house with a weary expression, but it wasn't the kind of exhaustion he recognized from a long day at work. Ethan watched silently as she slipped off her shoes and headed up the stairs without a word. He remained in the living room, listening to her footsteps fade into the second floor, while the silence around him felt heavier, pressing down on him. That night marked a turning point for Ethan. He could no longer ignore the growing discomfort, could no longer pretend there wasn't an ever-widening gap between them. The following day, driven by an impulse he could no longer hold back, he picked up her phone, something he'd never done before in all their years together. He hesitated, feeling like he was violating the trust of someone he loved, but a stronger need compelled him. He knew that if he continued blindly, this emptiness would eventually swallow him whole. When he unlocked the phone, he found a steady flow of messages and calls from an unfamiliar number. His normally rational mind spiraled into a place he'd never imagined it would go. Ethan resisted the urge to confront her immediately. Instead, he started observing her more closely, her schedule, her excuses, the art events, and the nights out. He made note of every detail, hoping to piece together what was happening and find something tangible to justify his suspicions. Deep down, he still wanted to believe he was wrong, that the issue lay within his own mind, that maybe he was simply tired and seeing things that weren't really there. A few days later, when Sarah mentioned she'd be at yet another art event, Ethan decided to investigate further. He drove to the gallery where she was supposed to be, only to find it completely shut down, no signs of activity at all. It felt like a punch to the gut, a wordless confirmation that something was seriously amiss. His heart pounded, and a wave of disbelief and despair washed over him. In that instant, he understood that perhaps there was no turning back. That night, Ethan returned home, resolute in his need to uncover the truth. Every silent moment, every distant look from Sarah seemed to fall into place, forming a bleak picture. He decided that if he was indeed being betrayed, he would not let it remain hidden in the shadows. On a bright Saturday morning, as Sarah got ready for yet another exhibition, Ethan watched her quietly, as though he was saying goodbye to something he'd once held dear. Her cheerful, distant voice was the last proof he needed that something profound had shifted between them. Once she left, he took his car and trailed her, maintaining a safe distance. His chest tightened with tension, and with every mile, his stomach twisted further. After about 30 minutes, he saw her park outside an isolated restaurant far from the city center. She stepped out of her car, smoothing her hair and smiling in a way Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. Then he saw him, the man waiting for her, smiling casually, without any sign of guilt or caution. They greeted each other with a quick but intimate kiss, enough to confirm Ethan's worst fears. Ethan stayed in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching as the two of them strolled into the restaurant like any other couple, as if they had nothing to hide. He felt a devastating blend of pain and disbelief, as if the ground beneath him had vanished. He couldn't fathom how someone he had shared a life with could just erase it all and carry on as though he had never existed. It felt as if the love they'd built together had evaporated, without a single explanation, without giving him a chance to fight for it. As he watched the scene unfold in the restaurant, a cold anger slowly started to replace the initial shock he'd felt. He had poured his heart, his hard work, and his trust into this relationship. Her betrayal wasn't just a broken promise, it was a blow to everything he believed in, everything he had tried so hard to protect. Each breath felt heavy, tightening his chest, but he knew he had to keep his emotions in check. This wasn't the moment to act impulsively, he didn't want to confront her in a fit of rage. Instead, Ethan stepped out of his car with deliberate strides and walked into the restaurant. He found a table out of sight where he could still see Sarah and her lover, laughing and toasting as though they were two carefree people in love, without a trace of responsibility. The sight of her, someone he knew so well but who now seemed so unfamiliar, cut through him like a sharp blade. This woman he had shared his dreams and his life with had become someone he barely recognized. When a waiter passed by, Ethan quietly called him over and asked if he would discreetly deliver a ring, the same ring he'd worn since their wedding day. That ring wasn't just a symbol of their vows but a bitter reminder of his loyalty, even as she broke hers. The waiter hesitated, visibly intrigued by the strange request, but he nodded and took the ring, glancing at Ethan curiously before heading over to Sarah's table. Ethan watched every moment with tense calm, sensing the gravity of what he was about to set in motion. He saw the waiter hand over the ring, noticed Sarah's look of confusion morph into silent horror. Her lover glanced between them, clearly baffled, but Sarah instantly understood. She knew that he knew, that everything they'd built was hanging by a thread. Seated in an armchair in the corner, Ethan kept his expression impassive, concealing the storm raging inside him. Sarah and her lover, still bewildered by the ring, looked around, trying to figure out if it was some kind of cruel joke. Finally, Sarah's eyes locked onto him, and she froze, her breath catching as though she'd been struck. Her face paled as she struggled to compose herself in front of the man she had spent years of her life with. She stood shakily, leaving her lover at the table, and approached Ethan with hesitant steps, her lover watching her in confusion. Ethan remained silent, his gaze fixed on her, betraying no emotion. When she reached him, the silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. She was the first to speak, her voice faltering, "Why are you here? And this ring, what does it mean?" He looked at her with a calm that was unsettling, his eyes dark and piercing as if they saw right through her. "You know exactly what it means, Sarah." She opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed caught in her throat. He continued, his voice low but steady, 15 years, Sarah. 15 years I gave to you, my trust, my love, my life, and you threw it all away. Why? What more could I have done?" Sarah swallowed hard, her gaze drifting away, but he didn't let her escape. "Look at me," he commanded. She lifted her head, her lips parting as though searching for some kind of understanding. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." "It's too late for that," he cut in, each word laced with a pain he could barely contain. "You've already said everything I needed to hear, with what you've done." With each passing second, she seemed to shrink before him, as though his words were unraveling the image she had of herself. She reached out, attempting to touch his hand, but he pulled away, cold and unyielding. "So you won't even listen to me?" she whispered, her voice faltering. Ethan gave a slight, bitter smile. "Listen to what, Sarah? That this was a mistake? That you're sorry? There's nothing you can say that will undo what you've done." He paused, his gaze sharp. "But I do want you to understand what's going to happen now." She looked at him, her face clouded with confusion. "What do you mean?" Ethan took a steady breath, his voice coming out more controlled than he'd anticipated. "I thought I understood what love meant, Sarah. I thought marriage was a promise that couldn't be broken, but what you did changed all of that. He paused, then added, thankfully, I had the foresight to protect everything I'd worked for before we got married. She frowned, still not comprehending. Ethan, what are you talking about? Crossing his arms, he looked at her with a calm but devastating expression. Do you remember our prenuptial agreement? Her face drained of color. What? That was ages ago, why are you? I remember, Sarah, and I suggest you remember too. Ethan's gaze never wavered as he watched her reaction. In that contract, there's a very specific clause, one you might have forgotten over the years, but it's the only thing you'll need to worry about now. She began to tremble, the realization dawning in her eyes as she absorbed the weight of his words. Ethan, please, what are you trying to say? You can't mean this. Oh, I've never been more serious, Sarah, he replied, his tone low and icy. The contract states that if you're unfaithful, you forfeit all rights to what we have together. The assets, the money, the house, everything. You walk away with nothing. She took a step back, stunned. This can't be real, Ethan. You're joking. That was years ago, we never took it seriously. I took it very seriously, Sarah. And now, you'll face the consequences. Ethan's voice was steady, his stance unyielding. You were the one who chose to destroy our marriage, and with that choice, you'll lose more than my respect, you'll lose everything. Sarah shook her head, tears beginning to well up. She stammered, struggling to find words, desperately trying to explain the unexplainable. Ethan, please. I was just confused, that's all. This doesn't mean anything. You know I love you, that I always have. It was just a mistake. A mistake that's going to cost you dearly, he cut in, his voice cold. You thought you'd get away with it, but this ends here. Ethan felt the weight of his own words but stayed resolute. Tomorrow, Sarah, I want you to pack and leave the house. This is your last night here. Her eyes widened, her expression shifting to one of desperation and pleading. You can't do this, Ethan. I have nowhere else to go. Please, I made a mistake, but it can't end like this. He looked at her for a long moment, a brief flicker of pain crossing his gaze. But he knew there was no going back. She had broken something in him that could never be mended. Sarah, I loved you more deeply than I ever thought I could love anyone, and now I have to live with the fact that you betrayed me, that what we built together was an illusion. He paused, his gaze dark and steady. You made this choice, and now you'll have to face it alone. She swallowed, her tears flowing freely, yet she knew he wouldn't change his mind. Without another word, Ethan rose from his seat and walked out of the restaurant. She stood there, staring at the ring on her hand, the symbol of a commitment that was now a bitter reminder of everything she'd lost. Sarah remained in the restaurant, frozen as she tried to process what had just happened. Around her, the once warm atmosphere felt surreal, the voices of other diners muted, the lights now unbearably harsh. Her lover watched, still in shock, without fully grasping the gravity of what had transpired. But Sarah had no doubts, every word Ethan had spoken felt like a final verdict, and she knew he meant every last one. The ring in her hand now felt unbearably heavy, a weight that bore the pain of broken promises and a future that was quickly disintegrating. Struggling to steady her breath, Sarah looked around, hoping for some sign of comfort, a word of reassurance that she knew wouldn't come from anyone here. Her lover, visibly uncomfortable with the intensity of the situation, mumbled a few awkward apologies, shaking his head as if searching for the right words. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away sharply, as though only now realizing just how flimsy the support she sought from him truly was. Still in a daze, Sarah rose from her seat and left the restaurant. Each step felt leaden, as if Ethan's words were echoing in her mind, shattering whatever faint hope she might have held. Outside, the night air was cold, but it was the hollow ache growing within her that truly made her shiver. She knew her home, the place she'd built with Ethan, full of their shared memories, was now out of reach. The world that had once seemed full of possibilities now felt small and suffocating, every corner haunted by her mistake. She wandered the city streets, her mind clouded as she grappled with the full weight of her actions. As she walked, memories of her past with Ethan surfaced painfully, like scenes from a reel of their life together, showing moments of happiness, times when nothing could threaten what they'd built. She recalled each promise, every talk about the future, and how he had been the foundation of everything she held dear, the security, the support, the unconditional love. All of it was now lost. Hours later, Sarah finally summoned the courage to return to the house that, in a few hours, would no longer be hers. She entered slowly, dreading the possibility of seeing Ethan, but the house was silent. Every corner seemed like a painful reminder that once she left this place for the last time, everything familiar and comforting would be gone. It was as if the walls, the photos, the frames, every piece of furniture, stood as silent witnesses to her farewell. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she noticed some of Ethan's things were missing, signs that he had already begun to let go, to erase traces of the life they had shared. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring into nothingness, fully aware that there were no more excuses, no justifications left to make. She tried to imagine what she might have said or done differently, but regret now wrapped around her like a shadow, impossible to shake. The house felt colder, lonelier, with silence now her only company. Sarah realized that beyond losing the material security Ethan provided, she was losing something far more valuable, the part of herself that, with him, felt whole, trustworthy, and loved. This emptiness inside her was overwhelming, and she understood that it would be a long time, if ever, before the pain would fade. At dawn, she began to pack her belongings. Each item she placed in the boxes seemed to carry an emotional weight, a memory now transformed into a farewell. The objects that once blended into their everyday life, a sculpture they bought on a trip, a book he'd gifted her, a painting she'd created with him as inspiration, were now symbols of a love she had destroyed. The process of packing felt endless, with every item she placed in a box forcing her to relive the moments they'd shared, as though she was slowly and painfully letting each memory burn away. Ethan returned mid-morning, calm and resolute. He watched her without saying a word as she, her hands trembling, attempted one last explanation. "Ethan, I know nothing I say will undo what I've done. I ruined what we had, I know that. But I need you to understand, this wasn't because of you. It was me losing myself." Ethan looked at her with a cold, unwavering gaze, showing not a hint of sympathy. "Sarah, you shattered me. You made me doubt every memory, every promise we shared. Nothing you say can fix that. You made your choices, and now you'll have to live with them." She lowered her head, unable to meet his eyes. The silence that followed was suffocating, the physical and emotional distance between them growing with every second. With her things finally packed, she left the house. Each step felt like a painful goodbye, and the emptiness within her was consuming. Ethan stood in the hallway, watching her leave, knowing that no matter how much this moment tore him apart, it was the only path left for both of them. When the door finally closed behind her, Ethan let out a long sigh, a blend of relief and sorrow. He knew this was just the start of a long road to recovery, but he was resolved to keep moving forward. Months passed since Sarah left the home where she'd once built so many memories with Ethan. She tried to rebuild her life, but a sense of emptiness was her constant companion, a painful reminder that lingered in every moment. Her efforts to recapture her old life became a heavy burden, filled with the same regret she'd carried since that night in the restaurant when Ethan returned her ring. Every thought of him brought a sharp pang, a reminder of the future she'd thrown away for a fleeting moment of discontent. Sarah struggled to maintain even a thread of stability. Without financial support and distanced from friends who now saw her as merely the shadow of the woman who had betrayed the man who had loved her most, every day felt like a battle without victories. Her financial situation grew increasingly strained, with no help from Ethan and her reputation tarnished, she had to seek out temporary jobs just to make ends meet. Her painting, once her passion and escape, now mirrored the life she'd lost. Inspiration had been replaced by sorrow, and her canvases seemed to absorb the emptiness she felt inside. Over time, the few people who still reached out to her drifted away, unable to understand or forgive what she had done. Meanwhile, Ethan remained steadfast in his decision to rebuild his life. The first few months were rough, the sting of betrayal lingered, but he turned his pain into an opportunity to rediscover himself. He threw himself into his work, built new connections, and little by little created a life free from reminders of his past with Sarah. The house, once a symbol of their shared dreams, became a space for his own renewal. He removed every reminder of Sarah, each photograph, each memory, transforming it to reflect who he was now, a man who, despite the wounds, was determined to move forward. The emotional mark she had left was still there, but Ethan chose not to dwell on bitterness. He picked up new hobbies, formed genuine friendships, and gradually allowed himself to believe that he could, indeed, build a new life. In an unexpected encounter, Ethan met someone who reawakened a spark of interest in him. Their conversation was light and easy, bringing back a sense of normalcy he thought he had lost forever. Slowly and with caution, he began exploring this new possibility, aware that he was now wiser and stronger than before. One day at work, Ethan received a letter from Sarah. He read it with the calm detachment of someone who had already moved past the pain. In the letter, she apologized again, admitting how much her life had changed since the end of their marriage and confessing the regret that now consumed her daily. It was a plea for forgiveness, but Ethan felt no urge to respond. At that moment, he realized that his time with Sarah, though meaningful, belonged to a past he was finally free from. With a peaceful gesture, he placed the letter in a drawer, choosing to move forward without looking back. Meanwhile, Sarah remained in her solitary routine, struggling to cope with the weight of regret and guilt, though the loneliness was unrelenting. As she watched life unfold around her, she began to understand what she had lost, not only a husband but the chance at a real, grounded life, a future that now seemed out of reach. Her betrayal had cost her everything, and memories of the past haunted her, reminding her of a happiness she hadn't fully appreciated. Once eager for new experiences and excitement, she now longed for only one thing, the peace she'd been unable to find since breaking what she had with Ethan. In the end, they each followed their own path, but in opposite directions. Ethan found the strength to start fresh, rebuilding his life on new, solid foundations, while Sarah, mired in regret, lived in the shadow of the past she had chosen to destroy.